What would you do if you saw a loaded gun pointed at your 8-year-old child for no reason at all? For SWAT officer Sarah Mitchell, this terrifying moment wasn't just a bad dream. It was a reality. A moment that would change her life and her family's forever. After 15 years on the front lines of danger, facing armed criminals and life-threatening situations, nothing could have prepared Sarah for the horror of seeing her daughter, Emma, threatened in her own neighborhood by someone who should have been a neighbor. Not a danger. This story is one you won't believe, and it's one that shows just how far a mother's love and courage will go when faced with unimaginable odds. Before we dive into the shocking details, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Let me start from beginning. We had just settled into our new home in Maplewood Estates, and I was hopeful. I'm Sarah Mitchell, a SWAT officer with 15 years of experience, and I thought I'd seen it all. Armed criminals, hostage situations, you name it. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the challenges I would face as a mother in this supposedly perfect neighborhood. Maplewood Estates looked like something straight out of a magazine. Tree-lined streets, perfectly manicured lawns, kids riding their bikes, and neighbors waving at each other as they tended to their gardens. It was the kind of place you dream about moving to when you're looking for safety, peace, and community. Emma and I were looking forward to a fresh start, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. But things started to shift on our third day in the neighborhood. Emma, my 8-year-old daughter, has a severe respiratory condition. Her lungs didn't fully develop when she was born, so she needs an oxygen concentrator to breathe properly. It's not a choice. It's a lifeline. She wears a small mask connected to a portable tank wherever we go, and it's the only way she can function normally. Despite everything she faces, Emma is one of the sweetest, most resilient kids you could meet. She loves drawing pictures of butterflies, reading princess stories, and making friendship bracelets for anyone who's willing to accept them. That afternoon, I was unpacking boxes in the garage when Emma came running toward me. She wasn't actually running, she can't. The simple act of walking too fast can make her breathless. But she was moving quickly, her face pale, her blue eyes wide with panic. "Mommy!" she gasped through her oxygen mask. The mean lady yelled at me. My heart sank, and before I could even ask who she was talking about, Emma gave me a quick description of the woman, the one with the yellow hair. I felt a protective instinct surge inside me. "What did she say to you, baby?" "She said I look scary and I shouldn't be outside." The anger bubbled up instantly, but I took a deep breath. Emma was shaken, and I knew I had to stay calm. This was supposed to be a safe place for us, a place where she could just be a kid. Yet somehow this woman had already made her feel like she didn't belong. "Show me where she is," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my blood was boiling. I took Emma's small hand in mine, and we walked 2 houses down toward the woman's house. There she was. Patricia Holbrook, the HOA president, standing in her garden, watering the plants like she owned the whole street. She wore expensive jewelry, designer sunglasses, and a disapproving frown that looked like it had been painted on her face for years. "Excuse me," I called out politely, trying to mask the irritation in my voice. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. We just moved in down the street." She looked at me, then at Emma, and her nose wrinkled in disgust. "I know who you are," she said coldly, eyeing Emma with disdain. "And I know what that is." She pointed at Emma's oxygen mask as if it was something unnatural or offensive. I could feel my jaw tighten. "That is my daughter, Emma," I said, keeping my tone controlled. "She has a medical condition that requires oxygen support." Patricia didn't seem to care. "Well, she's frightening the neighborhood children," she snapped. "Walking around with that mask and those tubes. It's disturbing. This is a family neighborhood, and we have standards." Every word felt like a slap in the face. Emma, who was usually so full of life, squeezed my hand tighter. I could see her body stiffen, and I knew she understood the cruel words Patricia was saying. She was only 8, but she wasn't naive. She could tell when someone didn't like her, and right now the woman in front of us was making her feel like a monster. "Ma'am, my daughter has every right to be outside like any other child," I said, trying to stay calm, but my voice was shaking with frustration. "She's not hurting anyone. She's just trying to enjoy her new neighborhood." Patricia's face twisted into an even uglier scowl. "I'm Patricia Holbrook," she announced, as if her title gave her some kind of authority. "And I don't appreciate your tone. That child makes everyone uncomfortable. You should keep her inside, or at least in the backyard where people don't have to look at her." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My daughter, my sweet, kind, brave little girl, was being treated like some kind of pariah for something completely out of her control. I'd heard my fair share of insults in my years as a SWAT officer, but this was different. This wasn't just about a threat I could neutralize. This was about my daughter's life, her dignity, her right to exist without being judged. "Mrs. Holbrook," I said, my voice steady but firm, "my daughter will continue to play outside whenever she wants. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the police." Patricia's face turned red with rage. "How dare you threaten me?" she hissed. "I'll have you removed from this neighborhood. I'll file complaints. I'll make your life miserable." I turned to leave, my frustration boiling over. "Come on, Emma," I said softly. "Let's go home." As we walked back to our house, I could feel Emma's hand trembling in mine. She was so quiet. Too quiet. "Baby, don't listen to that mean lady," I whispered, kneeling down to her level as we reached our front door. I brushed her hair from her face and kissed her forehead. "You're beautiful and perfect, exactly as you are." "Why does she hate me, Mommy?" Emma's voice cracked and the tears started to fall. I didn't do anything wrong. My heart shattered. It broke into a million pieces, knowing my daughter had to carry that kind of pain. This was the very thing I had feared since the day Emma was born, that people would see her condition, her medical equipment, and immediately decide she wasn't worthy of being treated with respect. "Sweetheart," I said, wiping away her tears, "some people are just filled with anger and hate. But their hate says nothing about you and everything about them. You are brave, kind, and strong. Never forget that." That night, as Emma drifted off to sleep beside me, I promised myself I would do whatever it took to protect her from people like Patricia. But the battle was just beginning, but Patricia wasn't done. What she did next would go far beyond simple neighborhood complaints. It was only a few days after the unsettling encounter with Patricia, Holbrook, when the first real sign that this neighborhood wasn't as perfect as I had imagined came through our mailbox. It was a formal letter from the HOA, one of those thick envelopes that you know isn't good news. I opened it, my hands trembling just a little, as I read the words that would haunt me for days. The letter stated that Emma's medical equipment, the oxygen concentrator and mask, was unsightly and didn't conform to the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. The HOA, led by Patricia, had made it clear, if Emma was seen outside with her equipment again, we would be fined. I couldn't believe it. My daughter's oxygen mask wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was what kept her alive. And now, some stranger who didn't know anything about us was telling us we couldn't even go outside without being punished for it. The letter threatened action if I didn't comply. I felt my blood pressure rise as I read it again. I was furious, but I knew I had to stay calm for Emma. She was already dealing with so much, and now I was going to have to fight for her right to simply exist in public. I immediately contacted a lawyer. This wasn't just a neighbor being rude. This was straight-up discrimination. The law was clear. People with disabilities had the right to be included in public spaces, and Emma was no different. My heart ached for her. I knew how much it hurt to be seen as different, but I didn't realize just how much it would affect her until I saw the way our neighbors started to react. We were slowly being pushed out. At first, it was small things. When we waved at neighbors, they looked away. When Emma tried to play outside with other children, parents would call their kids inside. I could feel the coldness, and Emma could sense it too. She stopped asking to play outside. She stopped smiling the way she used to, the way she always had. My once lively, confident little girl was becoming quieter, more withdrawn. One afternoon, I sat beside her as she drew pictures in her room. She hadn't gone outside in days. Her bright drawings of butterflies were now a little less colorful, her pencil strokes a little less sharp. She was always so full of joy, so full of hope. But now she was slowly retreating into herself. "Mommy," she said quietly, not looking up from her paper. "Why don't the other kids want to play with me?" My heart shattered right then. She didn't understand why people were avoiding her. She didn't get why her condition, something that wasn't her fault, was making her a target. I wiped away a tear before she saw it. "Some people don't understand, baby. They're scared of what they don't know, but that has nothing to do with you. You're perfect just as you are." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Not for Emma. Not for me. As much as I wanted to believe that we could just ignore Patricia and her cruel behavior, it was clear that this wasn't going away. I spent sleepless nights thinking about what to do next. Should I involve the police? The idea of having to call law enforcement over something like this felt so wrong. It wasn't a criminal issue, it was a civil rights issue. I wanted to handle this with education, with community awareness, not with confrontation, but the reality was hard to ignore. If this kind of discrimination wasn't stopped, it would never end. And I knew deep down that I was going to have to fight. Not just for Emma's right to play outside, but for her dignity, her humanity. Then came the breaking point. It was late one evening when I got the call. My mother's voice, panicked and frantic, came through the phone. "Sarah, you need to come home right now. That woman, Patricia, she pulled a gun on Emma." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind went blank for a second, and then it was like the world started moving in slow motion. My baby, my precious girl, was in danger. A loaded weapon was aimed at her for no reason at all, just because of a mask she had to wear to breathe. I barely registered my captain telling me I was cleared to leave. All I could think about was Emma, her safety, her terror, the sheer injustice of it all. I was a SWAT officer. I had been trained to face life and death situations, but nothing prepared me for the panic I felt as I sped home, my thoughts racing through the worst-case scenarios. I had to get there. I had to protect my baby. When I pulled up to our house, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of 2 police cars already parked outside. Neighbors stood in small clusters on their lawns, some of them whispering, others just staring. My stomach twisted. It was like they were all watching, waiting for something that should never have happened. I didn't even bother to park properly. I just ran to the front door, not even waiting for the officers to fill me in. I burst inside, and there she was, Emma in my mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Her oxygen mask was fogged up from her panicked breathing. She was shaking, her whole body trembling with fear. When she saw me, she let out a scream that tore through my soul. "Mommy!" she cried, holding out her arms to me. I rushed to her side, scooping her up into my arms, feeling her small, fragile body shake against mine. "I'm here, baby," I whispered, pressing my lips to her forehead. "You're safe now. You're safe." I couldn't help the tears that welled up in my eyes. How had it come to this? My little girl, just 8 years old, had been threatened with a gun by a grown woman. A woman who should have been a neighbor, a protector, not a threat. The officers briefed me on the situation. Patricia had called 911, claiming that Emma was acting suspiciously near her property. But the truth was so much worse. Patricia had seen Emma walking to the mailbox, a routine task for her, and in her mind, Emma's oxygen mask and tubes looked like a weapon. That's when Patricia had drawn her gun and aimed it at my daughter, convinced that Emma was a threat. A threat to a child with a disability. The rage I felt was like nothing I had ever experienced. My daughter, who couldn't even defend herself, had been terrorized by this woman. I knew Patricia had to be held accountable. Where is she now? I asked the officer, my voice deadly calm, the anger barely controlled. "We have her in custody," he said. "She's being processed for assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment of a child, and several other charges." "I want to press full charges," I said immediately, my voice steely. "Every single one available." "Understood, ma'am." And just like that, my nightmare had taken a turn. But even as Patricia was hauled off in handcuffs, I knew that the worst wasn't over. My daughter's trauma wouldn't just go away because the law had intervened. What Patricia did next was unforgivable. But how would the law handle it? Would justice really prevail? Patricia's arrest marked the beginning of a long and difficult journey, one that would demand every ounce of strength I had. I couldn't just focus on getting her behind bars. I had to fight for something far more important, Emma's right to feel safe, to feel like she mattered. When the officers hauled Patricia away in handcuffs, I felt a strange sense of relief. The woman who had pointed a loaded gun at my daughter, the woman who had terrified her for simply being who she was finally going to face the consequences. But that sense of relief didn't last long. The real fight was just beginning, and it wasn't just about the law, it was about healing. As soon as I got inside, I held Emma close. She was still shaking, her tiny body trembling in my arms as if she couldn't get warm enough. Her wide blue eyes were filled with fear, her face pale from the trauma. The poor thing was still processing what had happened, and I had no words that could make it better. "Mommy, I was so scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought she was going to hurt me. I stroked her hair, trying to comfort her, but deep down I was breaking. How could I explain to my 8-year-old daughter that some people are so full of hate and ignorance that they can't see the humanity in others? How could I make her understand that none of this was her fault? "Sweetheart, you did nothing wrong," I said softly. "You're not scary. You're beautiful." Some people, they're just filled with fear, and that makes them act in ways that hurt others. But baby, you are not the problem. You're perfect just the way you are. It was a tough thing to say because I didn't have all the answers. I couldn't promise her that things would be okay overnight. But I promised myself that I would do whatever it took to make sure no one ever made her feel this way again. The next day, I met with the prosecutor, Jessica Chin. She was a calm, composed woman in her late 30s, and I could see the determination in her eyes as we sat across from each other in the DA's office. She wasn't just fighting for legal victory. She was fighting for Emma, too. "I'm going to make sure we pursue the maximum charges," Jessica said, her voice steady but firm. "Assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and civil rights violations. Patricia needs to face every consequence for what she did to your daughter." Hearing those words gave me a small sense of comfort. There was a part of me that wanted to believe this would all be over soon, that once Patricia was held accountable, Emma could go back to her life. But I knew better. This was going to be a long, painful road. As if on cue, Patricia's lawyer tried to make a deal. I was shocked at how quickly they tried to downplay the gravity of her actions. They claimed that Patricia had acted out of fear, that the oxygen mask had looked like a weapon, and that she didn't understand the situation fully. They wanted to reduce her charges to minimize the consequences of pointing a gun at an innocent child. I wasn't having it. "No deal," I told Jessica firmly. "She needs to be held accountable for what she did. She terrorized my daughter. She pointed a gun at her. Fear is no excuse for that." Jessica nodded, her resolve matching mine. "We're going to take this all the way, Sarah. Patricia will be held responsible." The trial was a nightmare. The emotional toll it took on me was hard to describe. Every single day felt like a battle. I had to relive the worst moment of my life over and over again. And then, when it came time for Emma to testify, I almost couldn't bear it. I knew I had to let her speak her truth. She deserved to have her voice heard, to be a part of the justice process. But that didn't make it any easier. The thought of my baby standing in that courtroom, recounting the trauma she had experienced, made my heart break all over again. I held Emma's hand as she walked to the witness stand. She was so small in that big chair, her oxygen mask still attached to her face. But despite her size, her eyes were filled with determination. She wanted to do this. She wanted the world to know what Patricia had done. The prosecutor, Jessica, approached Emma gently. "Emma, can you tell us what happened on the day Mrs. Holbrook pointed a gun at you?" Emma looked up at me, her eyes a little wide with nervousness, but she nodded. "I wanted to get the mail," she began, her voice soft but clear. "Grandma said I could because it wasn't far. I walked to the mailbox, and then the mean lady came out of her house. She yelled at me, said I was scaring people and I should go away. Her words were almost too much to bear. But then she kept going. She said my mask made me look like a bad person. Then she pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. I thought I was going to die. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. I could see the jurors wiping their eyes, their faces filled with disbelief and sympathy. Even the court officers were visibly moved. But Emma, despite everything, sat up straight, her chin lifted. She wasn't afraid. She was telling her story, and she was doing it for herself, for every child like her who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Patricia's defense had no place to go. They tried to make excuses to claim that the oxygen equipment had been too unusual, but the truth was obvious to everyone in that room. Emma wasn't the threat, Patricia was. And Patricia's refusal to see Emma's humanity was what had caused all of this pain. When it came time for Patricia to take the stand, I could barely look at her. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, to say that she was just trying to protect herself and her neighborhood. But under cross-examination, everything fell apart. "Mrs. Holbrook," the prosecutor asked, "you sent multiple letters to the Mitchell family demanding they keep Emma indoors. Why?" Patricia's face reddened as she fumbled for an answer. She was disturbing to look at," she admitted, her words laced with disdain. "The neighborhood has standards. She was talking about my daughter like she was a problem, a blight on the perfect neighborhood." The anger I'd felt when I first met her flared up again, but I pushed it down. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about Emma. Patricia's admission of guilt in court was enough. She had no defense. Her actions were based on her disgust, her ignorance, and her fear. And now the truth was clear for everyone to see. After what felt like an eternity, the jury deliberated. When the verdict finally came in, my heart was racing so fast I thought I might faint. The forewoman stood, her voice firm and clear. "On the count of assault with a deadly weapon, how do you find?" "Guilty." The words echoed through the courtroom, and I collapsed into my seat, sobbing. Emma wrapped her arms around me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. Justice had been served. Patricia Holbrook was going to pay for what she'd done to our family, but while the courtroom battle was over, Emma's fight was just beginning.